Hello and welcome to Say That Again Slowly, the Cambridge Festival podcast where students interview the experts who have contributed to the festival. We try to pair up students and researchers from very different disciplines to bring things back to basics. There are no stupid questions here. This year's theme is power in all its forms, from nuclear energy to medieval saints, from the history of money to the biology of extraordinary animals. I'm Anna Mahtani and I'm a third-year English student. Today I'm interviewing Joe Cribb, a numismatist who is keeper of coins and medals for the British Museum from 2003 to 2010, president of the Royal Numismatic Society and Secretary General for the Oriental Numismatic Society for 7 years. His work centres on Asian coinage, specifically of the Krishnan Empire.
Hello, Joe. Starting off with kind of what exactly a numismatist is.
Basically, I do research on coins and other monetary objects. And so I'm working both as a historian of monetary systems, but also using coins to look at religious and political history. And my range is from Afghanistan, Pakistan, across to Japan, and south to Cambodia, Indonesia. It's most parts of Asia, and most of my work is on the ancient period, but I also dabble in later things. So recently I've been looking at Japanese coin collecting in the 18th century, coins in Cambodia, and how coinage began there and how it developed over the sort of early modern period.
A lot of your work seems, even though you are doing some kind of modern work, a lot of it seems focused on quite ancient coinage. I was wondering if you could talk slightly about how currency existed and was standardized before the nation state.
Well, the coinage begins quite late in the history of money. The earliest evidence we have of monetary transactions are in cuneiform texts, hieroglyphs from Egypt, and early Chinese inscriptions. And in each of those cases, monetary transactions take place without coin. So in ancient Mesopotamia, it's weighed amounts of silver. In ancient Egypt, weighed amounts of copper. And in early China, it's seashells, cowrie shells. So the coinage came along both in sort of Western Asia and also in Eastern Asia in about 600 BC. And in both cases, it came into being in states that already existed. There are surely periods before states existed, but they didn't write things down. So it's very difficult to know what exactly happened. We can make conjectures using sort of pre-urban societies that have survived into more recent times. So we can sort of turn to ethnography and anthropology to look at how payments are made in societies that are still at a sort of level of agriculturalists without towns, hunter-gatherers, and so forth, and no contact with coinage coming from Western powers. And there we see things very similar to what is recorded in early Mesopotamian and Chinese and Egyptian texts, that there are certain goods that are selected to make payments, and the payments are generally not commercial payments, but they're payments such as blood money and either dowry or bride price, payments where the value of what's demanded is not easily measurable. Sometimes it's, if the people have metal, then sometimes it's metal, but it can be livestock, can be food, can be cloth, all sorts of different examples. And quite often when such societies do encounter coinage coming from Western colonization, sort of imperial endeavors, they retain their sort of traditional means of payments for the sort of transactions that they were made for. But at the same time, in transactions with the foreigners, they'll use the foreign money.
So like a parallel currency existing between this material.
Yes, yeah. And sometimes they even develop exchange rates between their own money and the foreigners' money.
How would you sort of conceptualize the shift from these tangible forms of money and currency into metals and physical coinage?
Well, in early Mesopotamia, that we have the surviving law codes which stipulate payments. And also cuneiform documents that record payments, and it does definitely seem to be the state which is sort of imposing specific values on specific activities. And in early Mesopotamian laws, quite often things that involve somebody working for somebody else, and so then they're paid in the food they need to eat while they're working for them. But if they've cut off somebody's nose or killed somebody, then the amount is specified in silver by weight. It seems as though the use of precious metals by weight, which is what the basis for coinage at a later date, is something that's heavily regulated by the state. The state is also, from ancient Mesopotamia, we have weights presumably used for weighing silver, which have inscriptions on them that suggest that they are being made by the whatever is the power there behind. So it could be a king, could be a temple. The state comes in and creates a sort of regulatory apparatus which turns what had previously been socially regulated systems into formalized monetary systems.
With this idea of temples or rulers and the different inscriptions that we have on coins, what stories do you think we can gather from looking at these inscriptions and how they represented culture?
In China, most of our evidence comes from the written histories, and the earliest ones that talk about money are coming about the same time as coinage begins, and they're mostly sort of talking about how to control the monetary system. Should coins be large? Should they be small? Who should make them? Those sort of questions. So we don't get quite so much depth about the social activity as we do in Mesopotamia. But when coins begin in Western Asia, it's in Western Turkey, in the kingdom of Lydia. And we have a couple of Greek sources that talk about such things. So Herodotus says coins are invented in Lydia. And certainly the first coins we know of in the West are in that area. But we don't have any real socially informative documents relating to that at all. There's almost a gap between the sort of Mesopotamian texts and the emergence of coinage. It's very clear that weighed amounts of metal are being used, but it's only when we get coins that we see any sort of formalized structure. There's lots of gaps in what we know. Quite interesting what gets recorded. If you go through all the Greek literature and look to see what's said about money, you get Aristotle and Plato talking about money, and sort of brief mentions in earlier sources.
Because it's such a big part of our day-to-day lives, it passes without notice a lot of time. And that made me think of a quote. It was, "The extent of the power of money is the extent of my power. It is the visible divinity," Karl Marx. I wonder if you kind of have anything to say about how the visible divinity that Marx attributes to money contrasts with the invisible day-to-day commodification of money and how its significance alone is often ignored.
Well, I think money operates in lots of different ways and at many different levels. So if you ask an economist to talk about money, they rarely talk about coins and banknotes. which is how we often encounter it in our daily lives. And they will come up with explanations of money that are quite distant from the everyday practice. As a numismatist, my engagement with it is very much about the objects. And so my perspective is at the other end of the extreme. When people handle coins and banknotes, they very rarely look at them. They just get a glimpse. You make the payment on the basis of the size and the colour of the pieces that you're spending. You don't look at them and say, does it say 10p or does it say 50p? You know, you're just used to the shaped one is the 50p and the round one is the 10. You know, that's how you engage with these objects. And same with banknotes. It's about the colour and the size. You don't look to read this is a £5 note and it's guaranteed by the Bank of England. So a lot of what I'm engaged with sails past the average person, and it's only coin collecting and small children who can be quite engaged with the different pictures on them. But the rest of us are just, as long as we've got them and we can spend them, that's it. Yeah.
So do you think we overstate kind of the importance of who is figured on our money? I'm thinking of Austin on the Palmer £10 note, or how the Hamilton musical stopped the US government from changing Alexander Hamilton from the £10 US note.
There's a big sort of movement in the States to replace Hamilton with a woman, and there was a lot of debate. Jane Austen appearing on the notes. If people stop and think about it, there is significance in these images. If you like, if the banknotes are a window on the British state, then the British state is a very male-dominated state, and getting them to choose a woman to represent Britain, even though at that time we had a female head of state, it's just an imaginary figurehead that the state has, with no power whatsoever. The putting of a series of men on the banknotes is an indication of the way the government mindset works.
The way we see money and the images we put on them uphold certain systems of power.
Yes, yeah. I think that the images are there to articulate the power of the state and of the Bank of England to issue money. The old 50p pieces, if you were looking at it as a historian, okay, so this is the head of state. Well, we know for a fact that it's just a figurehead. And then you look at the back and you've got this woman sitting on a rock with a shield and a trident and a lion. If you're looking at ancient coins, you might think, oh, well, that's because they were familiar with lions. Well, the lion is not there as a piece of wildlife. It's a heraldic symbol of British monarchy. And the personification of Britain first appears on British coins in the 17th century. She also appeared on Roman coins as a symbol of the conquest of Britain. So you can interpret that symbolism historically, but if you take it out of context, it's very difficult to understand what on earth it means.
For anyone who's had the opportunity to look at the cushioned coins, you notice deformation practice seems to be evident in representations of the emperors, whereas current coins, like you mentioned, Queen Elizabeth, focus on authenticity, on representing a ruler as true to life as they can. How much of styling was a practical necessity for these older coins, and how much of it was a metaphorical and artistic choice?
Yes, I think one can say it's only in Europe in the late 15th, early 16th century that you start to actually see artistic representation that is attempting to create some sort of realism. Before that, it's the images on coins are representations, but representations of the authority of the person, and not necessarily of the reality of their image. The most famous Kushan king is Kanishka I. He's known through Buddhist texts and many inscriptions. And on most of his coins, he's shown with a large beard. But we also have coins of him showing him without a beard and with sideburns and a moustache. And his great-grandfather's coins show somebody with a moustache, and his successor's coins show somebody with moustache and sideburns. So, what is the reality of how this king looked? Did he ever actually have a beard? And why is he shown with a beard? It's possible that this is because he comes from a sort of the context of a broad Iranian culture. And in Iran, kings are normally shown with beards. So it's possible that his beard is just an indication of his kingship and his Iranian culture rather than a real representation of him. And his successor is shown as a sort of fairly, 50, 60-year-old man in his first issue. And then in his next issue, he's shown as though he's about 20. And then in the following issue, he's looking 30 to 40-year-old. There's no attempt at a real image person. It's an image of the ruler of the state. At the moment in the British Library, there's a big exhibition on Alexander. And we have this sort of image of what Alexander looks like. But if you got the thousands of coins which show Alexander that survive and look at the range of the different ways he looks, you'll see that what we have is a sort of conceptual image of Alexander, and not really of Alexander the Great. We can think we know what Alexander the Great looked like by looking at his coins, but we're looking at the coins that normally get published because they're the nicest example, not the whole range of what the image looks like. Before the Renaissance, the European Renaissance, we didn't really have realistic representations of kings or queens on coins.
So it's much more reliant on metaphor, and I know.
It's a visual metaphor for the state. Yeah. One is allowed to think about visual metaphors, I think. A metaphor is a linguistic device, and it's a way of conveying something about what is in front of you or what's happening through terms that you immediately understand. So visual metaphors operate in the same way. We have the state, and the state embodied in the king. So in order to visualize it, you use a device that allows you to immediately understand it, which is a picture. And a picture is never the person. All imagery is metaphorical. All language is metaphorical. I'm busy writing coin catalogues. They are not coins, but they show you what the coin. They inform you about the coins by putting them in a form that you can comprehend. But they are not the real coins, and they don't. The monetary system is not what you're seeing. What you're seeing is a book, and a book that's designed to help you understand. So that sort of it is also a metaphor.
I mean, you do use Derrida a lot, though, in your addresses to the Royal Numismatic Society, and also in your brief for your upcoming lecture. Do you think understanding the structures of language and of imagery is essential to numismatic study and to what it can bring to history?
I think it certainly helps a lot to have some awareness of how language works and the impact of language. Most of my communication about coins is in writing, and just the shaping of sentences and the vocabulary you use have an impact on what you're trying to communicate. So in numismatics, there are a lot of technical terms. So the word type isn't used in the way that it's normally used in English. It means the design on a coin, and it's sort of a conventional numismatic term. And so when using the word type in a numismatic article, I have to be quite careful about how I'm using it. Well, it's this type of coin, but that has a completely different meaning to a numismatist than it does to in an ordinary context. So so one has to think about how language works, and also I think it's the formation of a text is also part of the process by which one communicates. And so one of the ideas that I got from Foucault is about the way the creation that you're using to communicate stands in between you and the reality of what you're talking about. And, so art historians talk about, oh, this is a Rembrandt. Well, a Rembrandt is not what you're talking about. Rembrandt is a person, but you still just call it a Rembrandt. And that's a sort of metaphor that you're using, an associative concept to describe a piece of work. The same, when I say a Kushan coin is not, it's a strange sort of reality. This is a coin being used in Afghanistan and Pakistan or in India in the early centuries AD. And I add the word Kushan to it because the ruling dynasty were the Kushans. The Kushans isn't a state, it's not a people, it's the dynasty. So it's like calling a coin a Tudor coin. Most people who use English will understand what you mean, but it's not a very accurate description of the object. It's a sort of synecdoche, it's a connected object. So one's use of language, is something one has to watch very carefully in all contexts. But I mean, to me, that's part of the sort of postmodern movement is about being aware of such things. And I think, I suppose, putting the study of coins into the context of metaphor is my attempt to sort of suggest to other numismatists that they need to think more about the process that they're carrying out and how unconsciously they are creating a history, quite often without actually thinking about the process of creating it. You could describe it as a bit of a mission, but it's certainly something that took me a long time to come to. I've been studying coins for 20 or 30 years before I started to really stand back and think about what exactly was going on and how I was doing it and why I was doing it.
Yeah, money and power become so tied together that it's almost a cliche. I mean, we conceptualize our actions through the lens of productivity. We kind of idolize the wealthy, and even our superheroes seem to be defined by their extensive wealth. Your Batmans, your Iron Mans.
Yeah.
I suppose within that idea of metaphor and language, how much power do you think we can attribute to money in its physical form?
Well, you could say it has no power itself. This is what metaphor is doing, is that it's personifying an inanimate object, and the power rests with the people who create money and the people who use money, and so somebody with a lot of money you could say they have a lot of power because they have the ability to exercise power. So now in the contemporary world, we can see, where previously money was controlled by states, we can see that banks and multinationals are exercising power, which is sort of overriding the state. And the reason they're able to do that is because they've got more money than the rest of us. So it's a sort of the ownership of money and the production of money are where the power lies. When you have no money, you feel powerless. It's not the money itself that's powerful. It's the ownership of it. So money is a sort of that's why I sort of thinking of it as a metaphor. It's a metaphor for that power. Money is a sort of manifestation of the value that you've managed to accrue, and having that value enables you to exercise power. So money sort of, it is the metaphor that stands between us and power. I spent 50 odd years studying it, to realize that it actually is a very trivial thing in reality. There's a current sort of trend going on to, if you go into a shop and you offer them some money, some of the money that's been produced by the British state, it will be declined because they only take money that is regulated by a bank or credit card company. So you're immediately, there's a shift in the power that's going on. That's the power to control what you're doing. It's being handed over by the state to these non-state entities. And not only, if I have a £5 note in my pocket, nobody knows where I got it from, and nobody knows what I'm going to do with it. And if I do something with it, there's no record of me having done it. If your employee puts your money into your bank knows where it came from. It knows it's gone to you. You then spend it with a bank card or a credit card. It knows who you've paid it to, and it knows what you've bought. By using credit cards, we are de-anonymizing money, whereas in some ways, one of the magic things about coins and banknotes is that they are anonymous. If you're doing that in Tesco's and you use a loyalty card as well, then not only do they know that you've got that much money to spend, they also know that you're what you're buying, and they'll send you advertising that reflects what you buy. And if you don't use your card for a while, they'll start sending you offers to encourage you to spend. It's interesting how I suppose we adopt coinage because of its convenience and give power to the state that issues it. And now we use credit cards and debit cards, etc., for convenience. And again, we're giving power to these entities. So I think sort of how power operates in the reality of our everyday lives today.
Yeah, with this shift towards electronic currencies and alternative money forms, I'm thinking Bitcoin, NFTs.
Yeah, who are you giving, if you've got Bitcoins, who are you giving the power to?
Exactly.
Certainly not to yourself. I think China and India are trying to create digital forms of digital money. And again, you can see, this is the state trying to wrest back power from the banks and the credit companies. And by using digital money instead of actual coins and banknotes, then the state will get to know all these things about you. That's the banks and credit card companies. Really cynical, you can think this is just another form of Big Brother that's controlling society. I certainly think if one uses digital media and buys things online, you can see just how controlling these companies are. Interesting development that certainly has taken place during my lifetime. When I was a child, none of these things existed.
How do you think numismatics will evolve because of these new forms, and what will future numismatics say about the way we function?
Yeah, as a curator, I was very keen that we acquire the physical evidence of what's going on. There's lots of things that are a bit like money that we encounter. So in the British Museum, we acquired lots of credit cards, both from sort of sample cards from banks, but also we begged them off members of staff and things like that. And then add to that, there was a period when you had to have a card to use a telephone, which looked like a bit like a credit card. I've got a because I'm so old, I've got a Freedom Pass for transport in London that also looks like a credit card. And now my pass to get into the British Museum looks like a credit card. So there's this sort of, we're using the metaphor of money to sort of spread it to other things that have some monetary connection or some sort of security connection. So you want to create the impression that these things are secure, so you make them look like money which is secure. And through the post, you receive adverts that look like checks, and you get sent credit card shaped things that are sort of designed to sort of bring attention to something and make you think it's to do with money. And so all that sort of material we collected in the British Museum, and we also collect. If you go for a car wash, you buy a token, you go and put it in the machine. So we've got examples of that. I think it's Tesco's. If you buy stuff in Tesco's, give you a plastic disc which you then put into a slot to choose which charity you want them to donate money to. So that looks like a coin. It's a piece of plastic that looks like a coin, and so on. There's lots of things that are going on in the world that are sort of going out from money, and so trying to make sure that there's a record of such things. And so all those things, sort of create a history of the way money's behaving and thought of in the late 20th, early 21st century. So that we're still accumulating material for historical research in the museum. I think at the moment, I don't see any diminution of coins and banknotes, but I'm sure that it will gradually come about. You no longer spend money directly on transport in London, and there is this shift going on, but I think it's quite a long process. And most numismatists study the past, so there's still plenty of what was made and used in the past, and people continue to find it as well, dig it up out of the ground.
Actually, I wanted to turn towards this kind of abundance of ancient coinage that's being found, and specifically thinking about your position as keeper of coins and medals at the British Museum for 7 years. So, with recent upheavals in how we understand museums and what counts as cultural property, how exactly are approaches to coinage changing compared to other historical items?
Yeah, well, I think I would say as a general rule, museums in the UK are no longer acquiring unprovenanced material from outside of the United Kingdom. I mean, obviously, if somebody acquires on their holiday a Chinese coin from the 1990s, then nobody's going to think of that as cultural heritage. It will become cultural heritage, but it's not something that's so acquiring that sort of material doesn't create any problems. And I think the same with medals are seen as art objects, and so again, they're generally seen in a slightly different way to coins. I'd say until the UK signed the UNESCO convention, we were acquiring coins through the coin trade from India, from China, but the British Museum no longer does that. And to say it's much the same for most of the other museums in the UK. So I think heritage is very political, and I think that sometimes the politics gets in the way of the preservation of heritage, because many of the coins that are found immediately go into the marketplace and get moved around the world. We regularly see very common coins turning up all over the world that are found in India, for example. And those coins are normally end up in the hands of coin collectors, and so their provenance is lost, and the associations they have are lost, so that the, if you like, the heritage they represent is damaged by that trade. But these objects are so trivial that the institutions in India don't pay any attention to it at all. So in some ways, they're not looking after their heritage, and so that heritage gets dispersed. And so how to preserve that is quite a challenge. You know, obviously, if something is very valuable, then a lot of effort is put into preserving it in its place of origin. But when it's very trivial things, you know, the Chinese coin from 2,000 years ago is worth about £2 or £3, you know, and nobody's going to pay any attention to where it came from or what it is. It is. But when a large group of such coins are found together, that gives you a lot of information. And if all that happens is that those get sold into the trade, that sort of information about where it was found and how it was found is gone. And so, you know, the UK has been very the vanguard. You know, my colleagues at the British Museum initiated the Portable Antiquities scheme, and through that scheme, we now have very detailed records of what's being found in this country and the context, the circumstance, and so one can do serious research using that material, and it's all available digitally, and its value is greatly enhanced. And it doesn't mean that there isn't a coin trade, but it means that it gets documented as it's found. So the trivial things are problematic in this arena. But you know, my philosophy throughout my career, and you know, I continue it now, is to work with people in the countries where the material I study is found, and to encourage them to document as much as they can, and to bring the material they've got to the awareness of the authorities. But if, you know, in some countries, if you declare that you found something, the response is more likely to be punitive than to preserve the data. So it is a very fraught subject, and one wants to see the sort of system that's been set up in the UK extended to elsewhere, and to make sure that that heritage is not lost, because coins are part of everyday life and state activity, and by recording them you can get some sense of the history of the past. Certainly for the Kushans, coins play a very big part in understanding the history of that kingdom. So it's you know, one of the main drivers for studying them is studying their coins, is because so much information can be extracted from them.
Do you think that coins then provide a more ethical way of conceptualizing museums and of sharing culture across nations, being both so trivial and so defining?
Well, I think certainly the connections that I have around the world through the study of coins is an important contributor to the study of the past. But you know, coins are just one aspect of the past. You know, in some cultures, coins have a very low contribution to make. In others, they have a very big contribution to make. And you know, I think, you know, institutions like the British Museum, you know, have a responsibility to both the objects that they look after, but also to the cultures that are represented in those collections. So one of the things I paid close attention to was finding money to enable scholars from India and Pakistan and China to come to the British Museum to look at the collections that are there. If you wanted to look at Indian coins in Indian museums, you would only be able to see what's on display. So what we can do in the British Museum is enable people to work directly with the collection. So in the British Museum, there are tens of thousands of coins from the Indian subcontinent because of past colonial collecting, but we can make those available to Indian scholars who in India have difficulty accessing such material. I felt it was important to find ways to enable them to come and see the collections.
Final question, I swear. Just based on what you said, what role do coins have in colonization?
Yeah, that's quite interesting. Because coin collecting is part of more the imperial activity of the British government than the colonial. What we have acquired in the British Museum was largely through members of the East India Company and then of the British Empire, trying to understand the history of the region, collecting coins as a means of doing that. And then when they stopped working and they came back to England, then their collections became part of the British Museum collection. But there's also the other side of it is the imposition by colonial powers, imperial powers, of Western monetary systems on other parts of the world. If you take China had its own long-standing monetary tradition, but as soon as there was commerce with the West, through the Spanish bullion fleets going to the Philippines, through the British, the Dutch, the Portuguese, establishing trading settlements in around China and Japan, they brought with them Western coins, and China had a big thirst for silver. Not many silver resources in China, and so silver became very widely used in monetary transactions, and most of it was coming from the Americas via Spanish, British, Dutch, Portuguese ships, and that initiated a process that led in the late 19th century to China adopting Western style coinage. And so in China now, if you encounter coins, they're just like the coins we have. Different designs on them, but they're essentially Western coins. And it's in India, it's quite an interesting thing that when the British arrived in India, they tried to introduce Western style coins and found that nobody wanted them. And so they had to start making their own versions of the Indian coins. And it took until the 1830s before the British control was sufficient to shift the designs on those coins to Western designs. But they still used the currency system that was in India. So although they were Western style coins with royal portraits on, made by machines, it was still rupees, which is the sort of traditional Indian currency. So there's a sort of different mechanisms wherever empire and colonization took place. And if you look at Australia, all the coins issued in Australia are Western coins because there was no sort of traditional coinage system there. Even monetary transactions were very, very limited. And so colonization there brought the benefits, if you like to call them those, of having a Western monetary system. But almost everywhere that Western powers colonized or created empires, the interactions between how things were before they arrived and how things they were after they arrived created different monetary contexts. I find it quite a fascinating topic, that interaction. Certainly, I've written about it in relation to Cambodia and Hong Kong, and it's something that every time I look at it, I get very engaged with it as a topic because it is there's so much variety in the way it happens.
Thank you so much for taking time to talk with us.
That's all right. It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Make sure to follow the Cambridge Festival on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram and YouTube for more fascinating events, and follow the Say That Again Slowly podcast for more conversations with this year's experts on the theme of power in all its forms. Thanks for listening.